Welcome. So in our study through Genesis, we have come to chapters 7 and 8. He ran most of the way through 7 last time, just with a few minor adjustments. We're trying some new technology out today. We're remote controlling a bunch of stuff, so if it goes awry, I apologize in advance. Okay, we're doing our best over here. But anyways, we've been studying 7 and 8, which features God's judgment upon the sin of the world through the catastrophic global flood. So in this flood event itself that I'd like to discuss with you, okay, the Bible is very clear on the scale of the event with details of duration and magnitude, okay? Doesn't have a lot of details on exactly what happened, but we can really well define that it was a global event, and we'll talk about proofs of that today, and the magnitude or the sheer volume of the disaster, okay? The world tries to explain away these details like a fairy tale, okay, that in reality, the world around us is an amazing testimony of the power of God through the judgment of the flood and how it was truly a global disaster that not only killed all but 8 people, but also the animals of the air and the land and that were not in the boat, and probably the vast majority of the organisms of the sea as well. So the first thing we need to understand is that the world as we know it today is far, far different than the pre-flood world, okay? The very rocks upon which we stand testify of the cost of sin, okay? And the reminder of the power of the Lord in his judgment, okay? Now, there's an amazing amount of physical evidence that we're going to go over today of the flood. We can easily see all this in the world around us, so much so that it would take days just to hit the high points, okay? Much less the delight in the rabbit trails and all the little testimonies therein. We obviously don't have that kind of time. I'm actually held to a tight 45 minutes he held me to today. For those that know me, know this normally is about a 3-month conversation. So we're really dialing it in, okay? I know, so I guess we could just go on and on and on. No, I'd get in trouble for that too. But what I desire to do here is to hit those few key points that will empower you to answer the questions of the lost and provide a godly context to the physical world around us so that you may be able to draw them closer to Christ through the Lord's truth. Okay. So let us discuss the earth as we see it today. The earth is a fascinating place. The land beneath our feet is like a layer cake, okay, of different soils, sediments, and rocks all stacked up upon each other. Here in Tennessee, we actually have great examples of this as you're driving along the interstate, right? You're going up 24 or out 840. You can see where they carved away the hillsides when they blasted all that out so they could flatten out the roads. So there we can actually see the strata right there in front of us and the amazing power of the Lord's work there. But what I wanted to talk to you about also is this right here. Does anybody know what this is? It's a satellite view way out in space of this picture. It is the Grand Canyon. Good job. This is actually my favorite picture of it. This is from the International Space Station. A beautiful shot of just the complex nature of the whole Grand Canyon and all of its sub-canyons and everything. So this is the Grand Canyon here. Can we reduce those lights down just a little bit more, maybe? I don't know. Maybe I just feel like this one's beating me in the head, so. Okay, that's good. We're blessed here in the U.S. to have this great example, okay, of the places on Earth that show us the variety of layers, which are known as strata, okay, at the Grand Canyon. That's over in Arizona. So here we can see the distinct layer cake design I'm talking about, okay? So you can see all these different layers that are just stacked one on top of the other. Okay, all the way through the structure. You also see the immense scale of them, how this runs from left all the way to right. It's around the entire rim of the Grand Canyon. Here's actually a drawing the scientists have made of our understanding of the layers so far. I did not do that. Okay, that's good. Wasn't me. So here's a drawing of these different layers. You can see how the top half is laid out, how it's real nice, flat surfaces that go all the way up to the top. And we saw that stuff kind of right here. That's what's going all the way up to the bottom. What we can't see really well in the photos is down inside, deep in the canyon, and that's represented here, where we have this red line, which is called the Great Angular Unconformity, which is coincidental with the Great Unconformity over here, and we'll spend quite a bit of time talking about that. But you can see these flat layers that are laid out here, and then the area underneath it, these are just layers that have been taken and sheared and laid on their side. That's why they call it the Great Angular Unconformity. They have no explanation for this, okay? We will talk about it a little bit as well, but this area down here, this is granite and different sediment layers and stuff that really doesn't have a layer form like this. It's more of a like modeling clay structure and things of that nature. So we talked about the angular unconformity, moving on. So this is firsthand evidence of the global flood, which does a fantastic job of explaining what we see. But before we get into it much more, I want you to understand a little bit of the awesome power of water. Okay, we tend to have a bit of a misunderstanding of what water is actually capable of doing. But most of us can testify firsthand to the power of water and the massive impact it can have upon the land. We've seen this century massive tsunamis, which actually typically run in what's called the wave train. There's not just one wave, there's 2 to 10 of them that hit anywhere from minutes to hours apart. And when that hits the surface of the earth, the first wave is actually not often the biggest. It's usually the second or third, and they can reach upwards of 100 feet high. Okay. Now, what we don't typically remember is that these waves are not traveling at 10, 20, 30 miles an hour. They're doing over 500 miles an hour. Okay, the equivalent of a 747 flying through the sky. We can take a look here. This is a region called Banda Aceh. It's in Indonesia. This is before and after the 2004 tsunami. Okay, this killed 230,000 people and across 15 different countries. One of the deadliest natural disasters this century. And in all of total modern history, really. The total tsunami event lasted 7 hours, traveled a distance of 4,425 miles. Just for reference, the U.S. is about 2,800 miles across. So it's a large area of effect. Now, this right here, what I want you to see, this is actually a model of the tsunami wave pattern itself. So you can see it propagates forward. This is Sri Lanka over here. This is an hour of time that they're modeling here. This is about 400 miles that wave traveled before it hit Sri Lanka. Unfortunately, it doesn't model the wave covering Sri Lanka there, which it did really. But if you saw that rip pattern right here that occurred, that's where the fault line is, okay? So there's a tectonic fault line right here, and what happened is that fault line slipped, and right there just off of Sumatra, a 9.1 earthquake occurred, okay? In the period of about a second, the floor of the ocean rose and fell basically more than 100 meters. It was really violent all of a sudden. Now, in this animation, like I said, you can see it flow there and hit, but it hit this island, like we were talking about, 20 minutes after the original occurrence, okay? The wave hit, like I said, doing 500 miles an hour. It ran over the island, and you can see from the before, you can see there's a bunch of vegetation here, all the houses and trees and all that stuff, completely scraped off the surface of the earth, okay? The entire thing was gone, including that you can actually, if it's a little darker in here, there's you can see patterns here of brown where the remaining soil is actually being carried away in the current as well. So it's continually eroding that surface of the island away. They lost basically half the landmass of the island in a period of about 30 minutes. Okay, now. This shot here, this is a shot of the mainland that was concurrent with the island. And this is what it was restored to in 2014. The reason why I show you this is because you can see these trees and stuff and everything that they were able to restore. This is considered basically what the area looked like before it hit. So you can see just the sheer impact of the water upon the mainland and just how it removed everything that was there. And this is one tsunami event, okay? Now, move on here. So what does this have to do with our discussion of the proof of the global flood? Okay, what I want you to imagine is the full context of what the Lord is describing to us in Genesis here. So in chapter 7, verse 11, starting halfway through the verse, all the fountains of the great deep were broken up, and the windows of heaven were opened, and the rain was on the earth 40 days and 40 nights. And later on it says that the waters prevailed to 15 cubits, or that's about 22 and a half feet, above the highest point, the highest mountain points, okay? We are told a little later that the waters actually covered the surface of the earth for 150 days before they started to recede, okay? So it's not this, we tend to have this, kid church mentality of it was 40 days of rain and then everything stopped, okay, and it started to go away. It's actually a much longer event than that, that the text tells us. A matter of fact, when you add up all the days that the text does give us in very specific lengths, it's 371 days that they're in the ark. Okay, so it's more than a year-long event. It was 150 days before the water started to go down. Okay, so during this time, the Lord used the water in conjunction with tectonic forces like earthquakes, volcanic activity, to vastly change the surface of the earth. When we model the flow of the water from a globe that's covered with water, we actually see that amazing current forces develop underneath the surface of the water. It's interesting, the surface itself can remain relatively calm, but the current flow underneath the surface, several feet down, becomes very erratic and very, very strong, stronger than anything we see in our tidal flows today. That's because of the activity of the tidal rotation and all of that. So the surface of the earth is scoured from the continents and the ocean floor, and it's redeposited in layers as the water flowed back and forth. Now, this is actually a current understanding model of the tectonic plates, okay? Often we leave school with this concept of the continents as almost being like a floating structure that can move around like that. In reality, they're actually anchored in the tectonic plates themselves. So in order for Africa to move, this entire plate has to move with it, okay? Now, the tectonic plates actually are currently moving. We can measure it. We see it move. It's not very fast, okay? As we can imagine, it's about 0.6 inches a year, kind of a slow crawl. I did the math. After about 100 million years, it does move about 900 miles, okay? So it would take a while to do that. But what happens is what's called a catastrophic tectonic event occurs during the flood. And you guys have probably seen the structure of what they believe is the supercontinent Pangaea. Okay, that is quite possibly what the Earth looked like prior to the flood. And what happened, though, is during the flood, these tectonic lines here became really, really active. And probably the whole line ripped, much like that one that we saw that created the tsunami. If you can imagine this entire line doing similar things, and these plates moving at a rate of a couple miles an hour. Okay, what I'm telling you this for is because it is not a friendly event, the flood. Okay, it's amazingly destructive and horribly catastrophic. If you can imagine a tsunami wave pattern that not only lasts for an hour, but lasts for 100 days. Okay, you can start to envision the type of restructuring of the soils of the earth that could occur. Now, so when the Lord closed up the ark, okay, and then when Noah opened it back up, the Lord looked totally different than what he had seen before. So as the water moves the soils all around, this gives us this nice layer effect as it's redeposited back on the continental shelves, okay? And the Lord shows us via places like this in the Grand Canyon where whole ecosystems are pummeled and scooped up and then distributed back in these layers. So how do we know that these layers are laid down quickly during the flood and not over the course of 1 billion years or so? Okay, and that's pretty easy to see just from this image right here. So you see these nice straight lines that you can follow all the way across the rim of the Grand Canyon, and each and every single one of them is a nice straight continuous line going all the way across in the layer. Okay, if there were several million years in between each layer, the problem is we would get erosion of the surface, okay? So you see how this surface is actually eroded here? We would expect to see the same type of erosion in the surface. So that wouldn't be a straight line, it'd be a nice jagged line that went up and down and jazz, okay? So because this is a nice straight linear line, this is great evidence that the layers actually occur quickly. So as the rip current goes out and comes back in, it's depositing that sediment layer quickly over time. So if we look at that pattern carefully, we can see those clean lines from one strata to the next. And here is actually a closer view of an outcropping. Now, so over the long course, we would expect to see, like I said, that same kind of deterioration like you see here would be amplified in the singular layers themselves, and we just don't see that. So that old time that they're asking for is really not present in the strata. This has actually created such a problem in the scientific community over the last couple of years that the scientists have started to agree that there was an epic flood event. Okay, they're actually starting to include that in their modeling, that there was, if not an extremely local massive flood, that there was an actual global flood structure. So that right there is nice little news on that scale. Now, however, what's interesting too is this is not isolated to the Grand Canyon. The same pattern is seen all over the world. So we see that same linear pattern structure right here as we move up and down. This is the Gofi or the Rofi Canyon that's in Algeria and Africa. Okay, and then this right here, this is the Sharon Canyon, and you can see that same kind of linear profiling right there of the strata. This is in Kazakhstan, okay? And then this one here, this is an area in the Altai Mountains of Russia that's actually known as Mars 1 because they think it looks kind of like the surface of Mars. But you can see even in the Russian landscapes the same kind of vertical or horizontal layering effect. It's clean lines between each one. So it's not limited in structure to the things that we just see right here. So I mentioned that these strata layers are actually quite large. In reality, it's probably quite a understatement, okay? So let's pull out an example of that. So right here, this is what's called the Coconino sandstone. Okay, that runs all the way around the rim that we see there. It's kind of a sandy colored structure. If we go down, this is what's known as the Coconino National Forest, and this is that same Coconino layer right here that we see. And this is about 75 miles south of that. And the reality of this megastrata is that it actually covers from North Dakota to Southern California. This same layer in the Coconino sandstone. So these are not small, tiny things. And in reality, that's a fairly small layer. This right here I mentioned before, this Tapete sandstone, this is also what's known as the basal salt sandstone. This layer is represented by the yellow here in North America. Okay, so you can see it covers a vast range in North America, and in reality, it's also exactly the same over in Africa. Okay, so it actually crosses the construct of the ocean, and it's at the same height. It's really pretty impressive. And you'll ask yourselves, well, how do I identify this as exactly the same? When sandstone is layered, it has unique properties to the quartz in the sand that makes up the sandstone. These has unique chemical properties. So what they do is they pull samples of that sand from here and sand from here, and they compare those chemical properties, and they find that they're exactly the same sand. So that's how we know that that is one continuous zone. Several pages there. Now, this layer here is also known as the Great Unconformity, okay, because it lies on top of what's called an erosional plain. And it's believed that the layer below, when they measure what they believe to be the age of this material down here, it is much, much older than the stuff that sits on top of it. So these scientists look at that and go, well, we're missing about 800 million years. Okay, well, I hate to tell them this. What happens is when the flood comes along, it basically scrapes the continents down to this layer and then reorganizes it back out by laying it out this way. That's why below it, we have, kind of the clay structure of the Earth format, and then above it, we get this nice layer pattern that's put out by water, and we'll talk about how we know that's from water there. And you see this right here. They actually have no explanation for why this occurred. It's some sort of layering. It's possibly material that was laid out fairly early in the flood, and then an earthquake came along, or some volcanic activity that sheared it and laid it down at an angle. We really don't have a good answer for why that is like that, but we do know that it is. So think of the flood as kind of like a giant washing machine. Okay, it is actively got a current flow in it. It's spinning, and it's pulling stuff up and it's redepositing it over the course of the flood. So let's go back and look at told you I'd tell you how we know that that's layered by water, for instance. This is a good example right here. This is that white layer, like we said there, the coconino sandstone. And you see how inside the layer of the coconino, there's these what are called sediment lines. Okay, this is where the sand is deposited. And this line right here is a good representative. The average angle of this line is 20 degrees. And that's very important because we can look at sand structures in places like the Sahara and stuff like that, where when you have the deposition of the sand across the dunes by wind, that occurs at 32 degrees on the money. It's reliable physics, okay? But when sand is deposited by water, it has a reliable angle of 20 degrees. Okay, so this being a clean 20 degrees is good evidence that this whole layer is depositioned because of water that's flowing back and forth across it. Okay, now it turns out that when it indicates that the coconino sandstone was layered by that water, and this is actually a megastrata, like I said. It's an actions of only something like a global flood that can lay this type of pattern out quickly with preservation. So if you've ever been a southern boy, every once in a while you'd find a dirt road that you were going down, and you'll find what's called a washboard road. Anybody familiar with that? A washboard road, exactly. So what happens is the water flowing over the dirt creates a washboard pattern, okay, as it's flowing over, and it's very rough. It'll shake your teeth, right, if you go across it very fast. It's the same type of thing that leads to this, okay? So the same type of construct of the physics involved there. Now, what I also want to show you is probably one of the most striking arguments for a global flood, and that's what's known as bent rock, okay? So you can see this rock pattern here, how it goes up and it bends. These rocks are actually bent with little to no breakage, okay? So the layers throughout the bends, even though they're at extreme angles, the layers are also bent together, okay? So when this rock layer comes up, you can actually see that there's no breakage in that bend right there, and we can tell that they're layered together, not one on top of the other, because of the continuation of the angle. If this was done over a period of time, the angle would change and flatten out quickly over time. So you can see the continuity of the angle in the bends, even in extreme cases like this, where it's well beyond 90 degrees. And this is actually a whole mountaintop right here that has the same curve to the structure of the rock matter. Now, you've probably come to an understanding by this point in your life that rocks are hard, right? They don't bend, they don't break easily. Okay, I can testify to that myself. So what happens is what I call old time theory. Okay, people that believe in 4.3 billion years of the Earth. Okay, what they believe happens in order to make this possible is an extreme amount of heat and pressure is brought to bear against the rock surface. That creates a condition called plasticity that allows it to bend. Okay? Now the problem with that is when you apply heat and pressure in that kind of quantity to a rock to generate plasticity, to make it bend like that, it actually changes the structure of the rock. So think about it like coal undergoes heat and pressure and turns into what? Diamonds, okay? Same type of thing. It changes not the material, but the chemical structure of the material. So we can pull samples from these rocks, and we can identify that the structure out here is the same as the structure in here, okay? And across the strata, which means that it's not heat and pressure that brought this to bear, okay? What best defines this is actually the construct of the flood. Okay, so as the biblical flood takes and pulls out the rock surfaces and then layers it out as the water comes back and forth, that layer actually remains plastic for a while because it's filled with water. Okay, before all the water gets squeezed out of it from upper pressures above. And then because that remains plastic, as the things like earthquakes and the movement of the continents, when the Appalachians were made, when the North American continent impacted the African continent at one point, okay, that created the Appalachians. The reason why the Appalachians are kind of rounded over instead of the Rockies, which were also developed by something very similar, is because the Appalachians were probably formed early on in the flood, and they suffered from a lot of erosion from the flood, whereas the Rockies were probably later on in the flood in that construct. But anyways, this allows for that bending to occur. One of the easiest ways to see this and understand the pliability is actually children's Play-Doh. I love children's Play-Doh. It explains a lot of stuff. But if you take several different colored layers of Play-Doh and you put them together and you make this kind of nice flat surface, and then you reform it, okay, kind of play God, you're reforming the surface of the earth, okay, and you cut that away, you can see a good example right here of bent rock, right? And what happens when you leave Play-Doh out for a while? Just nice and hard, and your mama gets mad at you, right? Because she wasted money on nice colored Play-Doh. So this is a good example of how this kind of bent rock structure occurs. So that's kind of some powerful evidence for the sedimentary or strata evidence of the flood itself. So what I want to move on to is actually, hold on, this reset on me. Move to fossils, a fun thing that we're all fairly familiar with. So a fossil is created when an organic item is trapped in layers of earth and it's buried. Okay, the organic material begins to break down, and then it's replaced by minerals that seep into the vacuum that's left over at the organic material begins to break down, and that material begins to crystallize or solidify into a rock. Okay. A fossil is actually not the bone of the animal itself, but it's rather the mineralized inorganic copy and the shape of the bone of bones and other materials, okay, not just bones. So we can see here's some real nice fine examples. This is actually a coniform plant. This is the kind of plants we find in coal-bearing layers. It's kind of this weird hollow plant structure. And then this is a beautiful representation of a crab that even has its mouth open in its fossil there. If anybody's seen Indiana Jones and the Crystal Skull, that's the crystal skull right there. Looks just like it, right? No? Okay. Sorry, nerd in me. This is actually part of a nautilus that's probably been broken apart by wave action. Same thing here. We got, something akin to probably some sort of lizard, dinosaur-type creature. We got kind of a mashed head here, but you can see how it's all broken down and linearized in one nice flat layer here. So if conditions are right and the material is buried quickly enough, we can actually get also the preservation of soft tissue, okay, like this fish, where you can get the preservation of the skin structure. It all depends on, what kind of minerals are in the region and stuff like that. Happens fast enough, we can actually capture things like this. This is a very famous fossil that's owned by the Creation Museum right now of a fish eating a fish. Okay, so things happen to happen very fast for this fish to decide it's going to continue to eat lunch while it's being buried alive, right? So this is a testament to just how fast the cycle of burial happens. And then, as I mentioned, in order for a fossil to be made, the organism has to be buried very quickly. This is necessary because the body exposed to the environment and weather for very long at all, it quickly begins to break down. Right? We see this. It doesn't take long for the body to decay and the bones are scattered around, especially when one takes into account predators and scavengers and stuff like that. We live here in Tennessee. We see this all the time, especially this time of year with the deer, right? So a deer has an unfortunate interaction with a vehicle. Deer ends off on the side of the road. It's not long before the vultures show up and they begin to consume this newfound bounty that was provided for them, and then they proceed to clean up the mess and stuff like that. And it's not long before all you're left with is some bones that get scattered around, those that aren't eaten by predators that can break the bones apart and stuff. But this is actually part of the magnificent system that the Lord developed, the circle of life, if you will, okay, with a system that sustains all manners of life and keeps the environment running efficiently. So let's take a look at this in terms of the flood itself. As you know, I mentioned this great unconformity. This keeps coming back to this great unconformity right here. And here's what this has to do with fossils. What's really interesting is everything down here doesn't have any fossils in it. All right? They're just not there. All the fossils start to be laid down right in here and as you go up. Now, what's also interesting is, has anybody ever heard of the Cambrian explosion? Okay, where scientists believe that that's when a bunch of different species of animals all of a sudden appeared in the fossil record. That occurs right here in this Tapiat sandstone, or the salt sandstone that's layered on top of that great unconformity erosional zone. The reason why is because when the flood comes along, there are billions and billions of animals that die. Okay, and they are layered in this sandstone. It's not that they all of a sudden became living, breathing animals. It's that they all of a sudden died. This is not a record of life. This is a record of death. Okay? It's a record of animals that existed and died. So once we put that into the correct context, you can see how this really does exemplify the nature of the flood and the massive number of fossils that are entered into the strata due to that event. Now, we do find something that's very interesting when we look at the different strata, okay? And it is interesting because we see simple, like deep sea life occurs in the bottom stratas, okay? And as we move up the strata, the life does get a little bit more complicated, okay? It's slightly bigger animals, trilobites and stuff like that, that are, again, deep ocean animals. And we actually move further up the ocean water plane. So as we get up towards the further up, we get more mid-ocean animals. We get up here, we get higher ocean animals, things like coral zones, where you get starfish and sea anemones and all that stuff. And then you get up into animals above that live close to the ocean zones and are reliant upon ocean water and things like that. And as we move further and further up, we get into large land animals. Okay, we start moving further and further inland. These animals here. Now, this is also a fantastic example of flood dynamics, okay? So let's think about the text a bit. Again, in 7:11, it says, in the 600th year of Noah's life, in the second month, the 17th day of the month, on that day, all the fountains of the great deep were broken up, and the windows of heaven were opened. Now, and the rain was on the earth 40 days and 40 nights. Now, we are told several things at this point that we can infer upon these fossils. One is that the fountains of the great deep were broken up. Now, what exactly does that mean? Nobody knows. Okay, we don't know what that means. I think the best theory to date is that a series of volcanic fissures, those tectonic lines, okay, the Lord opened those up and magma began to pour in. Okay, that hyperboiled vapor and vaporized large bodies of water that are trapped in the surface of the strata there, and those immediately explode. Okay, we see this in common volcanic activity that occurs in the bottom of the ocean, as well as when that magma enters into the sea itself, it vaporizes that water that's right there, and that immediately rises through the column of water, and it's cooled in the atmosphere, and that actually joins in with the rain. Okay, so that helps generate more rain. Now, the second thing that we see there is that the windows of heaven were opened. So what exactly does that mean? We don't know. Okay, in all honesty, we don't know what that means exactly. It's probably because if you remember when he talks about the creation week, okay, day 2, he takes the body of water and he separates it into the upper heaven and the lower body of water, right? So you have the sea and the clouds and stuff structure like that. So what's probably happened here is that upper layer is being allowed to coagulate in the rain, okay, and it's being pulled out of the atmosphere. Now, it's also quite possible that we're talking about storehouses of rain, okay? We have context for this in Job where he talks about the storehouses of the snow and the hail, okay, that he was saving up for judgment in that. You know, the hail judgment that occurs in Revelation, that's talked about in Job. But we don't know where the Lord pulled this water from, but what we know is that there was an awful lot of water. Okay, and that comes down. So what we also learn further reading in the chapter, though, is that the world was not flooded all at one time, right? It's not like, poof, the world was flooded, okay? But it's flooded over a steady rise over the 40 days until it was about 23 feet above the highest landmass, okay? And then that body of water remains until basically the end of that 150th day. So in this situation, different animals are able to survive and run away, okay? So smaller sea life is not able, think about the massive amount of sediment that is all of a sudden poured into the ocean, okay? Smaller sea life is not able to breathe in that environment, so they succumb faster. And especially at the lower levels of the sea where all this volcanic action starts. Those are going to be the first ones to die. And then as you move further up, you get the larger animals. Larger animals are able to handle themselves better. They're able to survive longer in the disaster, okay? And then when you move up to land area, you get things like this. See, he found his flood buddy right here. This is a flood that occurred in Africa. One of my favorite pictures, a cute little guy. But some animals are able to run away from the regressing onslaught of the water. And larger sea life thus can withstand the greater and greater currents and worsening water conditions. And smaller land animals and those that cannot move quick enough would be the first to be swept away. And then you see the mobile life on land. These are actually all flood images of animals moving in floods and like the Africa plains and stuff. So, you know, these guys are much more mobile. They're able to run further inland, get higher up, and avoid the consequences of the encroaching water. Same with like these water buffalo, okay? They know enough to try to find area where the water isn't. Now, let's go back to the column image itself. The flood can account for the distribution of different ecosystems in subsequent layers laid down by the water. So what this is this is not the progression of life over time. This is the progression of death from the flood, okay? It's an example of which animals succumbed to the terror of the flood first and which were able to live the longest, okay, including the large animals that are able to, you know, climb up to much higher elevations and withstand much longer periods of time. So that's good construct evidence there from, let's not do that, whatever that was. Now, there's even more things that is testified by the fossil bed. This right here is what is known as a bone bed, okay? And these massive boneyards are distributed throughout the fossil record. And these bone beds are basically large collections of bones covering vast areas that are disarticulated, which means that the bones aren't connected together in a normal pattern or anything. And they represent a number of different species all in the same pile. Okay. Now keep in mind a few things happen. First of all, we know that death occurred before the flood, right? So animals were dying. And if you take an entire globe, there's going to be a number of animals that die before the flood even occurs, and rot occurs and stuff like that. But it's not necessarily been long enough that the bones are destroyed. But what happens is those get swept up with the land mass as well. And then the animals, the finer, smaller animals, all get broken apart in that process too because they can't withstand the pressure. Like I said, a tsunami moves at 500 miles an hour. Okay, and that's a small scale compared to what we're talking about here. We're talking these waves might have been moving thousands of miles an hour and creating such a strong current that it is worse than getting run over by a 747 in full flight. Okay, you can imagine what that could do to a body. We've seen bodies get hit by trains, right? They're typically dismembered in that construct. So we're talking something much, much, much more powerful in this. So these vast areas and these large numbers of piles. There's plants and stuff that are gathered up in the same bone beds. So these are actually a lot of plant life, flower life and stuff that's involved in that. They're dying and they're swept away and the water in their midst and deposited in the strata like we talked about before. And then this is actually a vertical shot of a bone bed that's in Utah. This is at the Dinosaur National Monument in Utah. And what we see here is great evidence of a global flood and how it's not a local event. Because like I said, these bone beds are visible all around the world. And you can see here firsthand, here's one kind of land-looking dinosaur up here. Here's some large bones probably related to leg muscles and stuff, some vertebra all mixed up throughout. There's some different heads and structures of totally different species over here and some plant life and all mixed in. It's this intermingling that is important in that. If this happened over long periods of time, okay, like we said, long periods of time don't promote fossil growth. You have to have something that occurs that basically immediately buries the organism to create that. And what's also seen as these is a nice vast distribution, which I'm sure you can all really attest to, of marine life in the upper layers. Okay, this is light marine life, like shells and things like that, things that would probably be floating around on the surface in this high current washing machine kind of thing we got going on. Okay, what's interesting about this is, me and my daughter can testify to this firsthand. We have plenty of shells that we've picked up in rock formations just on our property here in Tennessee. I've seen things like this in Oklahoma, Utah, California, England. This is a global phenomenon, and we found fine examples of these things on places like Mount Everest. They found fossils of fish and seashells up there, and in all the Himalayas, all the high points, we find this distribution of this marine life. And such a pattern of distribution can only be well explained by a vast flood that covered the whole Earth and a global catastrophic tectonic activity that changed the surface of the planet drastically and rapidly. Here's another shot of just kind of a good example of what the marine life fossil looks like in those mountains. Now, another example actually also too is fossils of whole organisms that we find. So this is one of the best preserved ones that we find in the column. It's a nice, good structure of some sort of animal that had a nice spiny back on it, kind of an alligator-ish type creature. And what's interesting about this is, like I said, it has to be done quickly. It must be buried so fast that it's not exposed to weather and scavenger activity. So as you can well imagine, this is not a very common occurrence. When we see events like this, we're talking about earthquakes, landslides, and tsunamis, okay? Or some construct of a true, total, cataclysmic flood, because we see large preservations like this, especially in those upper layers, the last ones to die and stuff, across the entire globe. Okay, so finding well-preserved whole or fairly whole organisms throughout the fossil record, also on a global scale, these findings can also only be well explained by a severe catastrophic event like the flood. Now, if it happens fast enough, we can get something really cool like this, okay? So what does this look like to you guys? They're fish. I figured you'd be familiar with fish. Mike's pretty good fisherman over there. So this is actually a school of fish in fossil form. Okay, the cataclysmic scale of burial to create this fossil right here is pretty epic. On top of that, you notice they're all pretty much in the same plane. Okay, so if this happens a slow process, they're going to be in different planes of structure. You notice they're all kind of flattened out to one plane. This is from the layering of the strata, okay, and that's that pressure sitting down on top of them. So the evidence of a global catastrophic event embedded in the Earth's layers, it fills with countless fossils, okay, reminds us of the truth of the biblical account of the flood. They challenge us to reflect on the state of our world and our own lives, urging us to remember the need for redemption through Jesus Christ, okay? This is not merely an ancient story, okay? Like I said, this is not a story of life. This is a story of judgment and death. It's a profound testament to the reality of God's judgment and the seriousness of sin. Recognizing the flood as a historical global event allows us to see the world through the correct biblical lens, okay, that the Lord has provided us with, reinforcing the truth of creation and the moral and physical implications of rebellion against God. The biblical account of the flood is not just a story of destruction, like I said, but it's also one of hope. The preservation of the Lord's creation within the ark itself. It underscores the necessity of turning to God, acknowledging our sin, and embracing the salvation only found through Jesus Christ. This understanding helps us to convey the godly context of the world around us to those that the Lord puts in our lives, providing a strong foundation for the biblical account of creation and the entire message of the Bible. So let us therefore hold firmly to the truth of the biblical account, using it to guide our understanding of the natural world and to share the message of God's grace and redemption with those around us. Now, I'm hoping that the evidence of the flood and the layers of rock that bear witness to it and the continual reminder of the fossils and everything, they remind us of our need for Jesus and the hope that is found in him alone. So that's all I have for you today on that. I'll be more than happy to answer some questions for you. I ended 2 minutes early, but you can come up here. We'll answer any questions I can. But until then, let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for the blessing of the day, Lord. Thank you for allowing us to have such a wonderful example of your might and your power and your love right in front of us. That example of this global event, this fullness of your destruction, Lord. And Lord, you created the world with water. And in this judgment, you destroyed it with the same water. And you rebuilt it again. Lord, and you allow us to see in true testimony every single point of that laid out before us. The very rocks cry out of your glory. Lord, allow us to take hold of that, to strengthen our walk in those facts, Lord, and use this as truth to help carry us forward. Allow us to have the opportunity to speak with those in our work and in our lives, the people that we come across that don't know you yet. Lord, and allow us to use this information to draw them in, to draw them into an understanding of who you are and your glory and your majesty and the love of Jesus Christ and how much you long to know them. Lord, bless us and guide us and protect us. In the holy name of Jesus Christ we pray. Amen. Ooh.